All right, I'm back with David Azizi from the law offices of David Azizi, and we're actually going to do a second discussion type question. We did one 2 weeks ago that was related to a case with a retailer and an employee of another retailer that had tripped and fallen and hurt herself. Well, I will actually share that on Google Plus, and I'll share that through the law offices of David Azizi Google Plus page to give you all the results of that situation. But we're going to do another one today that's more of a focus group. And today we're going to talk about amputation. And David was part of a case in which an individual actually lost a thumb and a few of his fingers. And I'll let David explain that case before we dive into some of the questions. So David, what exactly happened in that particular case?
Yeah, this was a pretty tragic case. It was an individual who had been hired by this farmer through a temp agency that had sent our client to work on the farm. In order to do the irrigation work and some of the other stuff. Now, the farm owner who hired this guy never made sure as to whether the temp agency has any workers' comp insurance or not. And there were some issues with regards to safety guidelines with the particular irrigation machine that he was using. But our contention was that this irrigation machine was faulty and that it would basically, the chain would fall out. And the way these irrigations, or this one that it worked, it was an old one, is that it had a forward, neutral, and back button or lever that you could use. And in our case, our client said that he was driving it, chain falls off, puts it in neutral, gets out, and attempts to put the chain back on. And as soon as the chain got back on, our contention was that this particular irrigation machine was defective and improperly maintained by the farmer, and that it would kick it into gear forward. So as soon as our client put this chain on, this thing automatically on its own, even though he had set it on neutral, kicked into gear, and unfortunately as a result of it, it amputated his thumb, it amputated his middle pinky finger and part of his ring finger. So basically, our client ended up with 2 full fingers and a partial ring finger. And I'm sure you could imagine, I've talked about this case before and other stuff, is that you're limited to being able to hold a cup like this. You know, one of my colleagues who's in the business who does mediation has said, look, one of the things that separates us from the animal kingdom is our thumb. You know, if you have your thumb, you can hold a cup like that, or if you're trying to grip something, you know, that's how you can grip. If you don't have your thumb, then that's how you're gripping. And a lot of times, your grip strength is because of the thumb, which is able to hold underneath whatever you're trying to grip. And so the farmer, of course, said, no, I didn't do anything wrong. There's nothing wrong with the machine. The machine was properly working. What he did is something that is his own fault, that he didn't put it into neutral and the chain fell off. He forgot to put it back in neutral. It was already in gear, so as soon as he put it back on, the machine started going off. We established that to some degree, he did agree that yes, at times the machine would engage itself even though it was on neutral, because there have been other employees that had worked at his farm and had commented or complained about that. So that's how we were able to get a recovery for our client. But in this particular instance, he was saying, no, it was working fine. I had repaired that problem, and it was no longer an issue for this irrigation machine.
So just to clear that up in layman's terms, not lawyer terms, it's the person working for them. It's not his equipment. It's the person that he is working for has provided this piece of equipment. So it's not. He didn't bring his own chainsaw. Basically, it's the other person's chainsaw, not a chainsaw, but an irrigation system.
Yeah, it kind of like, I guess for lack of a better word, you can look at it as like a bicycle. It's kind of like on a bicycle type method where it would rotate and then it would move this tubular long irrigation things that would water the field with whatever needed to be watered. And in the middle is where you would sit, and it's kind of like a tractor bicycle type situation where you drive in, you go forward, and you water everything, and then you roll back or whatnot. Unfortunately, I didn't get much training as a farmer, so I'm not too keen on.
I'm from North Carolina. I know all about farms. So, okay, David, let's go over some of the numbers. And you may not remember the numbers in detail. I may have to put them in the brief blog post. How do you remember how old this individual was? Do you remember how much it cost to have these surgeries and how much it cost for? What were the numbers that went into this situation, so we can ask the question for the Google Plus people and the people on social media?
Fair enough. He was in his mid-30s. As far as the surgeries, other than the hospital visit where he went and had to have it sutured, and they had to basically, unfortunately they weren't able to save any of the fingers that got amputated as a result of this accident. So his medical expenses were not that high in terms of care, because unfortunately all they had to do was go to the hospital, suture it up, bandage it up, and maybe some follow-up bandage care. So there weren't astronomical amount of medical bills, maybe $5,000 to $10,000 worth of emergency medical bills and follow-up bills for his bandage care. What came about in terms of this case was as to whether any prosthesis or prosthetic devices would be helpful for him. But again, like I said, he lost his thumb, he lost his pinky, and he lost his part of his ring finger. Now with prosthesis, they're not really functional. It's more from a cosmetic standpoint. So for this client, unless he wanted to be able to look like he's got his full hand, from a functional standpoint, a prosthesis wouldn't help him, especially with the thumb, because once you lose that, you got the joints, you got everything else. You can't have prosthesis function like that. Maybe down the line in the future, they'll be able to invent stuff to where a person will lose their hand, God forbid, but will still be able to have it function like a hand. But at this point in time, that was not available. And our client he never graduated from high school. He was a Hispanic individual, no formal education. So mostly what he had known most of his life was manual labor work. So there was a loss of income that he was going to sustain as a result of this incident. He was receiving basically almost close to minimum wage as a result of working on the farm. You can imagine mid-30s until age at least 65. He had a family that he had to support. So unfortunately, I felt really bad about this guy because, again, his whole life involved his hand because he did manual work, and now he didn't have a thumb, pinky, or partial of his ring finger, and that's what our damages were as a result of this case. In addition to the emotional trauma, he had physical injuries as well.
So the question I'm going to ask Google Plus and social media is, what would that be worth to you? If you were in your mid-30s with your current occupation, which a lot of people on Google Plus use their hands a lot with technology, with cell phones, with building applications, with doing social media, with SEO work, if you lost access to your thumb and 2 fingers, how much loss of income would you have? And personally for myself, I would have to adjust my entire lifestyle. And I am young enough to think that my glory years are ahead of me. So I would be distraught. I'm not going to lie. That would be something that would, like David said, that's mental. That would just, I love my job. I love what I do, and not being able to do it efficiently. I don't think I could do my job with 3 fingers. I really don't, especially with the speed I type, the way I use my computer, the way I take photos. I couldn't do it without those functioning. So the question is, what would that be worth to you? If you were filing a lawsuit, if someone was negligent and you had amputation of 3 of your fingers, what would you think would be a proper amount that would be the compensation that you would desire? And are there any other questions you think we should ask David, or does that pretty much wrap it up?
Yeah, I guess one of the other questions you can ask is, I mean, I've had cases where people lose the tip of their thumb, okay? So the question is, if you lost part of the tip of your your thumb, or part of your pinky, is that in any way the same value that you would put on it? Or if you lost, obviously if you lose the whole thumb, it has a different value to it. So those are some of the questions that comes up a lot in amputation cases is how much of the finger would you say is worth money in terms of value? Is it if you lost the whole thing, if you just lost a little bit of it, if you lost a tip? People have lost tips and things like that. Obviously, the less you lose, I would think that it's less damages. So those are some of the factors that in other amputation cases go into it. And one of the things is, in this case, is the liability factor. Are the juries going to believe the farmer and say, yes, it was a driver error and he didn't make sure that he didn't put it in neutral, or are we going to believe the employee who says there was a malfunction with this machine, it kicked in gear?
Absolutely, and we will have this conversation for a week or two on Google+. I'll share it in some communities, and please feel free to comment. You can comment below this YouTube video, or you can comment anywhere on Google+, or anywhere you can find either of us. Make the comment, and we will definitely follow up with the amount that was rewarded to this individual, and we will explain it in detail in a future hangout. Thank you for your time, David.
All right, thank you.